The use of romance idiom to ennoble characters is not unique to Butler. Afra Behan had employed a similar strategy in her depiction of the hero Orinoco or the royal slave. While for both Behan and Butler the use of romance is political, it is Butler who is the more radical of the two in this respect. Behan's use of romance is a kind of exceptionalism applying only to Orinoco, whereas Butler's is justified by a carefully supported argument about a whole culture. Her preface cites a range of sources in support of her view of ancient Gaelic society, the most significant of these being Geoffrey Keating's Fora Frese or Erian in Irish, completed around 1634 but not published until 1723. Just imagine the date, the years. For example, it took a very, very long time to be published, and which Butler must therefore have read in manuscript. Butler's use of romance is justified by the piety and culture of the Irish past, and that past is in turn used to suggest that the native Irish will eventually be able to reconstruct their ancient society. The invading Danes raised monasteries and slew priests, throwing the sacred host itself to the dogs. But the Irish eventually succeeded in releasing themselves from their slavish tyranny. In like manner, Irish tales suggest Irish Catholics oppressed in the aftermath of the Williamite Wars will eventually succeed in asserting their native liberty. So, during that time, as you have read in your children, in your, let's say, school times, during the prep schools, for example, we come across with Gulliver's Travels. Whereas virtue rewarded and Irish tales orientate themselves differently in relation to Irishness, they share a literary mode, the romance, concerned with elite and circumscribed words. However, by the early 18th century, fiction had begun to accommodate the mundane, the imperfect, and the low-born, and to deploy the realism of time and place characteristic of the early novel. So, during that time, Irish novel is just developing slowly but surely, let's say. But it was so slow compared to British fiction at that time. As the 18th century progresses, Irish fiction too is significantly marked by an enlarged sense of the subject suitable for fictional treatment and by an expansionist impulse, a historical moment in which even remote nations are increasingly bound together by commercial and imperial links is reflected in the contrast moment of fictional characters now confronting cultures including, but also going beyond those of the British Isles. At mid-century, emergent notions of national identity in Irish fiction are shaped not only by the old binary opposition between native and invader, but also by the context of empire building and global commerce. So these are the main factors. Just read again and try to understand what they are. Context of empire building and global commerce. Beyond the reflection of quotidian social reality, 18th century novelists also used the device of travel and its potential for comparisons, for reflection on the nature and extent of national character. So around 1700s, British colonies became to be well known, and they were under the rule of English governments at that time. So they loved to travel. So the traveling became more important for the authors. Just imagine Albert Selkirk's adventure. He was a sailor, he went far east and then came back to the UK and told what he had seen at that time. And Daniel Defoe was a keen observer, as you can imagine. He heard what Selkirk said about his adventure journey, and in his mind, Defoe just created his masterpiece, Robinson Crusoe, as you can imagine. Travel does not always lead to the recognition or development of identity. It can also have an upbraiding effect, softening distinctions and allowing new identities to emerge. The return to origins, the homecoming, does feature in 18th century Irish fiction. So what happened in England and how it affected those travelings, affected some authors. It also happened in the island as well, in Ireland. The return to origins, the homecoming, does feature in 18th century Irish fiction, as it does in 18th century fiction generally, but origins are not always seen as decisively affecting identity. The most profound and most extreme treatment of identity in 18th century Irish fiction is Gulliver's Travels, written by Jonathan Swift. Just imagine the date, year. Swift's own complicated sense of identity was sharpened by acute feelings of displacement. He once claimed to have been born in Ireland by accident, and his novel is neither set in that country nor does it contain any explicitly Irish subject matter. Well into his 40s, Swift still hoped to have an ecclesiastical career in England, and regarded his appointment to the deanship of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin in 1714 as a kind of exile. Yet a decade later, Swift was to become known as the Patrick Dean for his passionate and inventive defense of Irish constitutional and commercial interests in the Draper's Letters. Significantly, although Swift wrote and published in Dublin on Irish matters and had close relationships with Dublin printers, his major literary undertaking was directed towards a metropolitan audience. He took considerable care that his best-known work, Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World, to give it Swift's own title, be published in London, making a rare trip to that city to deliver the manuscript himself. Purporting to be an autobiographical account by a ship's surgeon, Lemuel Gulliver, the main character as you know, travels into several remote nations of the world is, in its original title, elaborate detailing of time and place, and resolute empiricism, British Empire, for example, essentially indistinguishable from the work such as William Dampier New Voyage around the world. It parodies to such unsettling effect. Like its non-fictional models, Gulliver Travels satisfies the desire of sedentary readers to learn about exotic lands and beings of which Europeans were gradually becoming more aware. Gulliver has manifestly incredible experiences, visiting lands containing people 6 inches tall, giants, and flying islands, yet in appealing to verisimilitude as proof of their veracity, his travels explore expose the constructed nature of truth-telling in the documentary narratives of his real-life predecessors. Gulliver's Travels is not, of course, at all about the remote lands Gulliver visits, but about the unwarranted pride modern Europeans take in what they know and have their modes of government, scientific achievements, and civilizations. So during the 18th century, not only Britain, but the other European countries were the same. They were traveling, they were also making new colonies all around the world as well. So, the antics of the Lilliputian court and Lilliput's war with neighboring Blefuscu recognizably parallel political ambition in the Hanoverian court and English enmity towards France. Yet, when represented in a miniature, these things appear ridiculous. The Academy of Projectors, which Gulliver visits on his third voyage, satirizes the pretensions of the Royal Society about scientific progress when, for example, mad projectors attempt to extract sunlight from cucumbers. Like Swift's earlier prose satires, The Battle of the Books, 1704, and A Tale of Top, 1704, Gulliver's Travels exceeds specific targets to satirize the self-involvement and self-congratulations. Pay attention to those words, self-involvement and self-congratulation, which Swift took to characterize modernity generally. Unlike the early prose satires, however, Gulliver's Travels uses precisely those narrative's features: a first-person narrator, reliance on circumstantial detail, central to the early 18th century novel, a literary form which takes modern self-involvement with complete seriousness. The formal choices Swift made in writing Gulliver's Travels establish a close and fundamental resemblance between his own work and Daniel Defoe's The Life and Strange Surprising Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, even though the latter's modern myth of self-sufficiency was entirely antithetical to Swift.